Snow erased the horizon. The valley stretched out in a sheet of hard white glare, so bright it hurt to look at even through smoked lenses. Dark dots moved across it, men and gear and a tracked vehicle, until the first burst of machine gun fire stitched through their ranks and all the neat formation fell apart. Rounds chewed into the snow in streaks of gray and black, slamming into armor, packs, and bodies. Fine powder leapt into the air around the patrol as if the ground itself had exploded. Shouts scattered over the open net, half clipped by panic and the grinding roar of the guns on the ridges above. "Contact left, contact high. Get down, get down." Staff Sergeant Rowan threw himself sideways, boots skidding, shoulders slamming into a shallow lip of snow that barely passed for cover. On his right, one of the local allies crumpled with a sharp grunt, rifle spinning out of his hands, red already soaking through the white. "Where the hell is that coming from?" someone yelled. Rowan risked a glance. The right side of the valley was a wall of ice and rock, all slashed by old avalanche scars and pockets of shadow. Somewhere in that mess a machine gun raked the open ground with slow, confident bursts, cutting off the patrol's route back the way they'd come. On the left, higher still, another position spat orange flashes, crossfire perfect and crushing. They were in the center. A natural bowl. No real cover. No route out. He grabbed for the radio handset clipped to his vest, thumb jabbing the transmit switch. "Viper 6, this is Hammer 1. Troops in contact. Heavy fire from north and west ridge. Request immediate." Static screamed back at him, a harsh, grinding squeal that set his teeth on edge. No words, no call sign, just a wall of noise. He yanked the antenna around, tried another channel. Same result. That static wasn't random. Something was stomping on the frequencies. "Comms are fried," he shouted. "We're blacked out." A burst stitched the snow right in front of his face, sending shards of ice into his cheek. He tasted blood and copper and cold. "Second squad, smoke front." Reef's voice cut through the chaos, close enough to hear without a radio. The SEAL commander was half upright behind a jag of rock, rifle pressed tight into his shoulder as he tried to spot the source of the fire. "Get that wounded man back." Private Hayes, the saw gunner, crawled forward, dragging his light machine gun through the snow with a grunt. He swung the barrel toward the left ridge and opened up the weapons fast, angry chatter trying to claw some space for them to move. The answer from above was swift and vicious. A heavier gun on the upper slope hammered back, each burst so strong it seemed to punch the air. Hayes had just hooked an arm under the wounded ally's harness when one of those bursts found him. The impact snapped his head sideways, dropping him into the snow beside the man he tried to save. Rowan flinched as both bodies jerked, then went slack. "Hayes is down," someone cried. "Hayes is down, he's hit bad. Smoke! Now!" 2 canisters sailed out, hissing as they hit the ground. White vapor poured from them, eerily matching the snow, blending with the wind. For a heartbeat, the fire slackened as gunners searched for new shapes to shoot at. Then the mortars started. The first round landed short, a dull whump that sent a geyser of snow into the air, but hit no one. The second landed closer to the rear of the patrol, showering them with ice and dirt. The third walked it in closer to the center of the bowl, and then they came in a pattern, far near center, bracketing them, hurting them. "Mortars! They're walking it!" Rowan shouted, voice hoarse. He knew that sound, the odd pause in the sky before impact, the way the air seemed to suck in. Each blast shook the valley, knocking men off their knees, tossing packs aside like toys. "They're pushing us to the center," he thought, dazed. "Forcing us to bunch up. The middle is the worst place." Overhead, high in the thin blue, something buzzed. Rowan lifted his eyes, squinting through the haze. A small quadrotor drone hung over them, distant but menacing, a black cross against the sky. Its tiny rotors hummed as it drifted, adjusting position with slight, tuned motions, always keeping the patrol in the center of its gaze. "There!" one of the locals shouted in accented English, pointing up. "They're walking to fire off that thing. Do we have anything for it?" Rowan yelled back. "What, snowballs?" someone snapped, half hysteric. Another mortar hit, close enough that Rowan felt his teeth clack together. Fragments hammered his armor and helmet with dry, vicious taps. On the ridges, the guns never stopped. He looked down at the radio again, as if staring hard might force it to work. Static still. No help from higher. No air, no counter-battery, nothing. "Sir," the platoon's sergeant rasped to Reef, who had slid down next to him behind the stunted rock. "We're out of time. We call fire on our own heads, or we die here anyway." "Can't raise anyone," Reef grunted, scanning the upper tiers of rock through his optic. "They've got a jammer somewhere. This is all set up. Those guns aren't eyeballing us. They're locked in." The sergeant swallowed, thumb hovering over his own handset. Danger close from this range? And with their jammer? That kind of call could wipe us all. "We're already in the grinder," Reef said. "Pick your poison." Another mortar slammed into the snow 30 yards away, flipping one of the Allied fighters onto his back in a spray of white and red. The man twitched once, then went still. Rowan's lungs burned. He could feel panic clawing at his throat, an urge to stand up and run in any direction that wasn't this one. He crushed it down and checked his men again, counting helmets, counting faces. Fear wasn't new. Its strength was. He heard the platoon sergeant inhale, getting ready to say the words that would call artillery onto their own grid. A single rifle crack cut through the valley. It was so sharp and clean that for a second Rowan thought it was in his own head, a memory of ranges far away. Then something in the sky twitched. The little quadrotor hiccuped, one rotor shattering. The drone spun once, twice, then dropped, tumbling end over end, its frame snapping apart as it smacked into the snow with an almost comical whine. Everyone froze. "Drone's down," a voice whispered. "What the?" 2 seconds later, another shot reached their ears. Same tone, same crisp snap, this time with a faint echo off distant stone. This time the effect was on the ridge. One of the machine guns on the right flank coughed, started another burst, and then went dead. The heavy shape of the gunner slumped sideways, his rounds streaking high into useless sky before his finger slipped off the trigger. "Who's shooting?" Rowan muttered, eyes climbing up, following the line back across the valley. He found the opposite ridgeline, a jag of ice and rock that rose higher than the rest. At first he saw nothing but snow and shadow. Then a dark speck caught his eye, almost lost against the white. A tiny mark on the crest of the world, motionless. He blinked. It could have been a rock, a bush, anything. Another shot cracked. The remaining gun on the left ridge hesitated as one of its crew doubled over, then toppled. Seconds later, a second figure jerked and disappeared behind the sandbags. Rowan's heart slammed against his ribs. "Sir," he breathed, not sure if Reef could hear him over the roar. "We got a friendly shooter somewhere high. Way out." Reef followed his gaze the best he could from his angle, squinting. For a heartbeat he saw it too. That faint hint of shape along the jagged crest, half buried in wind-blown snow. Then the next mortar landed, and everything blew white again. More shots came, spaced, patient. An RPG man, sprinting to a better spot on the mid-slope, pitched forward and rolled. A figure next to the mortar tubes went stiff and dropped onto the boxes of rounds, sending them tumbling. The pattern of fire shifted. It didn't stop, but it lost rhythm. "Move!" Reef bellowed. "While they're distracted, push those wounded. Rowan, take first squad. Hook right toward that rock scar. Use the gap." They crawled, slid, and dragged bodies through churned snow, every inch of fight. The incoming fire faltered, then surged from yet another point. This one even higher, a gun that had stayed quiet until now. "They've got more up there," the sergeant shouted, ducking as tracers slashed past, high and searching. "They're still adjusting." Mortars, too, started to correct again, short rounds landing near where the squad was trying to go. The unseen enemy learned, fast, even while someone far above tried to punch holes in their plan. Rowan didn't look back up at the ridge. He didn't need to picture the stranger crawling through the snow up there, breathing slow in the thin air, fingers steady on a trigger while his own hands shook pushing a wounded man through icy slush. The rock around them shook, snow falling in curtains from the slopes. Somewhere in the chaos, in a calm voice he could only imagine hearing later on a recording, Reef said during a debrief, "Whoever she was, she shouldn't even have been there. She'd already failed basic. Rowan didn't know that yet. Right now, all he knew was that without the ghost on the far ridge, they'd already be dead. As the patrol staggered, crawled, and slid toward any cover they could find, the distant shots kept coming. Cold, methodical, cutting away just enough of the worst threats to give them slivers of space. On the far crest, half buried in snow, a prone figure lay still. Her gloved hands cradled the rifle. Her breathing was so slow it barely fogged the air. Her scope traced the lines of the valley like a surgeon's gaze tracks veins under skin. Wind hissed over the ridge, brushing snow from her hood. The world around her was all white and blue in distance. She took another breath, another shot. Before her face came into frame, before we could see the eyes behind the glass, the world snapped to black. 3 days earlier, the mountains looked almost kind. Sunlight bounced off the sea of snow, blinding but clean. The forward outpost sat on a rocky shelf overlooking a narrow pass. A scatter of low, insulated huts, a short strip for small aircraft, an antenna farm bristling with masts. Solar panels tilted toward the cold sun, the only hint of warmth in a landscape of ice and stone. Inside a cramped weather shack, the air smelled of coffee grounds and electronics. A space heater rattled in the corner, ticking as it fought to push back the cold. Mara Vance sat at a desk hacked together from old crates, shoulders wrapped in a faded fleece under her uniform, eyes on the monitor as wind speed numbers crawled across the screen. She tapped each set into a log book with neat, tiny handwriting, then glanced at the analog gauge on the wall to confirm. Outside, she could hear the muffled thump of boots and the clink of gear as a platoon readied for patrol. Voices rose and fell, laughter mixed with curses as someone dropped a rucksack. The sound set a low hum under everything she did. She finished her shift summary, temperatures, gust patterns, barometric trends, and sent the data. The computer chirped its confirmation in a flat tone. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the wind beat softly at the insulated walls. "You on the afternoon check too, Vance?" A head poked through the door, breath smoking in the air. It was Burke, one of the squad leaders, cheeks red from the cold. She glanced back at him. "Yeah, I got it." He grinned, friendly but distant, already half turned away. "Good. Somebody's got to keep the wind gods happy while the grown-ups go for a walk." His words were a joke, but when the door shut, their echo stung more than she wanted to admit. Grown-ups. Real work. She shut down the monitor, zipped up her jacket, and slid her notebook into her pocket. On the way out, she checked the lens covers on the small cluster of cameras mounted on the roof through a feed. Frost had crept over one. She noted it in her log. Someone else would have to climb up and brush it off. That someone was probably her later. Outside, cold slapped her face like a hand. The patrol yard was a scatter of motion. Men and women in layers of camo, local allies in heavy wool and mismatched gear, all moving around vehicles and sleds. Radios crackled. The scent of exhaust cut through the crisp air. She kept to the edge of it. No one told her to join the formation. No one told her to move aside, either. They just flowed around her. A pair of young soldiers she didn't know by name joked loudly as they checked their rifles, the punchline lost to the wind. One of them glanced at her, eyes flicking to the weather patch on her sleeve and then away again. Not hostile, not friendly. Just the way you looked at a piece of furniture. Useful background. Mara headed the other direction, toward the outpost's ragged excuse for a range. It sat on the far side of the compound, nothing more than a line of standing stones and half-buried targets against a distant slope. No one else was there. Most days, no one used it. Ammo was monitored. Range time was scheduled. But she had a quiet arrangement with the supply sergeant, the kind that grew out of staying late and doing inventory when everyone else wanted to sleep. A box of rounds sat in a locked metal cabinet with her name on it. No one asked questions. She unlocked the cabinet, took the box, then walked out to the painted line carved into the snow. The world out here felt different. The sounds of the patrol prepping were muffled by distance. Wind carried only the hiss of snow grains grinding over ice. She set her pack down, took out her rifle. It wasn't standard issue off the rack. She had tuned it in bits and pieces during months up here. Better optic than most. Small standard tripod. A stock that fit her shoulder the way a glove fits a hand worn in by work. Sling adjusted to exact tension. Everything quiet, everything familiar. She went prone, pressing into the snow until she could feel the shape of the ground through her chest. She unfolded a small notebook next to her, flipping to a page covered in tiny marks and numbers. Ranges to each boulder downrange. Average crosswind at different times of day. Corrections she'd tested and circled. She watched the mirage over the snow through the glass. Even in the frozen air, heat shimmered from the ground in faint, rising threads. I tracked their angle, their sway. She breathed out, pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked, sharp and flat in the cold. The target in her scope, an upright slab of rock with a spray-painted shape on it, jumped slightly as the round smacked into it near the center of mass. She ran the bolt, chambered another, adjusted her hold by a hair. Again and again. By the time the magazine was empty, her notes had another line. New gust pattern with this temperature. Slight drift she needed to counter. She drew a small wind rose diagram, marking how gusts swirled back off the slope and curled into the range. Patterns. Always patterns. Footsteps crunched behind her. You always shoot like that when no one's watching. The voice was even curious. Older, with a hint of ocean drawl that didn't belong in these mountains. She looked back over her shoulder. Commander Reef stood a few paces away, bundled against the cold, gloved hands tucked under his arms. His beard had gone more salt than pepper. Deep creases fanned from the corners of his eyes, lines carved by sun and strain instead of laughter. His gaze shifted from her prone form to the rock 300 meters away. Or, do you only bring the good groups out when I stroll by? He added. She pushed herself up to a knee, brushing snow off her sleeves. Sir, she said simply. Reef nodded toward the notebook. You keep that for fun? Her fingers hovered over the page for a second, as if she might close it, hide it. Then she forced herself to flatten the book instead, letting him see rows of numbers, crude drawn silhouettes of ridges and gust arrows. Started as part of the weather log, she said. Range winds. Got out of hand. Out of hand, he repeated, eyes flicking back to the rock. At 400, that pattern would center you on a chest with a headshot flyer. At 7, gut and lung, no drama. You've run this out there too. She shook her head. I don't get range time that far. And yet it sounds like you have. The word needled at something inside her. She swallowed and stared past him for a heartbeat, where the mountains rose like teeth behind the outpost. He watched her, then shifted his stance, stepping to the side so he wasn't towering over her. I read your file, he said, matter of fact. It says you don't do so well when rounds snap overhead. The back of her neck went cold in a different way than the air could manage. For a moment, she was somewhere else. Heat, the smell of cordite and cut dirt. A training lane at basic plywood buildings, targets popping up with stencil faces. A fellow recruit, Mike, stumbling and going down, shrieking. The instructor bellowing, move. Drag him. He's bleeding out as blank rounds snapped past. Except the scream hadn't sounded like Mike. It had sounded like. Her heart hammered. She could taste dust in her mouth again. Vance. Reef's tone brought her back, rough but not harsh. Walk with me. She blinked, found his face again, the range, the frozen air. She forced herself to fold the notebook, stash it, sling her rifle. Snow squeaked under her boots as she followed him toward the headquarters hut. Inside, the light was yellow, sickly, but at least it was warm. A coffee pot sat on a file cabinet, burnt smell seeping out. Reef closed the door, shut out most of the yard noise, then crossed to the wall where satellite photos were pinned under strips of tape. Wide shots of mountains, shadows, valleys. One in particular was circled in red marker. He pointed at it. Tell me what you see, he said. Mara stepped closer. The image showed a broad white valley, flanked by high ridges. The track of some old avalanche scarred one side. In the valley center lay a dark smear where something had dug into the snow. Crash site, she said quietly. Airframe broke apart on impact. Debris trail here and here. Good, Reef said. That is one of ours. Unmanned. Sensor payload we did not want to drop. And yet, He tapped the smear. Here we are. She frowned. The valley around the smear looked smooth at first glance, just snow and wind. She leaned in. The printer had done no favors to the shadows, but faint lines curved along the valley's flanks. It took a second for her brain to sort them out. Across the slope, then faint zigzags down. I thought this was wind-carved, Reef said, tapping the curved lines. Terrain guys said the same. That's still your read. She traced one of the faint paths with a gloved finger. It cut across a shoulder of rock, then turned at an odd angle, straight toward a darker zone that matched a likely blind spot from the main approach routes. Wind wouldn't do that, she murmured. Not with this terrain. Those are tracks. Old ones. Maybe from sleds or men on foot, crossing back and forth to find a path that avoids line of sight from here. She touched a likely observation point, and here, Reef's gaze sharpened. Avoids us. Or whoever holds those spots, she said. He nodded once, slowly, then stepped aside so she could see more of the wall. Other photos showed that same valley from different angles. In each, faint marks in the snow linked the crash site to narrow slots in the ridges. This drone, he said, tapping the original image again, was carrying encrypted data on patrol schedules, sensor fields, routes through this range. If our opposition walk off with it, they get months of warning on where we move and where we watch. So we go get it, she said. It wasn't a question. Exactly, Reef said. Small mixed force. Light. In and out. We go at first light before any other visitors and grab that sensor package. So far, so simple. He turned, picked up a thin folder from his desk, and flipped it open. A single sheet of paper with her name at the top stared back at her. Except, he continued, I have a problem. He tapped another line. Sharpshooter from First Squad. Frostbite, nasty. Out for at least a week. The mission profile still calls for overwatch. High ridges, shifting wind, long lanes. Not exactly something I can hand to the first person who says they like the view. He watched her as he spoke. You grew up in snow country, Vance. That right? She nodded once. Northern woods. Winters ran long. You hunted? Yeah. Tracked in this kind of ground. Not this steep. But close, she said. Reef shut the folder with a soft slap. Your record says you choke under fire, he said bluntly. But your range scores are out past the curve. Your weather log's red, like a sniper's dream journal. So, I have to ask, what happened on that live fire lane? Her throat tightened. Images flickered behind her eyes. Mike's grin before they stepped off, the instructor's bark, the snap of blanks, then the sudden, raw shriek as Mike went down. Only it hadn't been his voice. Not to her ears. She saw another face, younger, in a different uniform. Saw a stretcher. A flag. She swallowed. Sir, with respect, that's in the report. I read the report, Reef said. Reports are dumb. People are messy, eh? I don't have a week to figure you out. I have 3 days. So you can answer me here, or I assume the paper got it right, and I leave you to wind readings forever. Her fingers curled into fists around the strap of her rifle. Anger mixed with shame, bitter and hot. My brother died in a range accident, she said at last, voice low. Not at basic. Before. Different unit. Different base. Live fire exercise, something went wrong. I never got the full story. But my mother got a folded flag. Reef stayed still, eyes on her, quiet. When we ran that lane, she went on, they had a guy act as a casualty. He screamed. Bad. Voice sounded like him. Like my brother. And I stopped. I knew it was training. I knew here. She tapped her temple with 2 knuckles. But my hands wouldn't move. My feet wouldn't move. All I could hear was that sound. Instructor said move, or I'd get someone killed. I stayed put. She exhaled, breath shaking once before she forced it steady. So they pulled me. They were right, too. I didn't argue. Quiet stretch for a moment. Reef nodded once. Thank you, he said. No pity in it, just acknowledgement. Now I have a clearer picture. You froze not because round snapped past, but because ghosts grabbed your ankles. She snorted softly despite herself. Something like that. He tapped the satellite photo again. Out there, ghosts are a luxury. Up on that ridge, I don't need courage. Not the kind they put in recruitment ads. Anyway, I need someone who can do trigonometry at heart rate 150 and keep track of Gus while platoon screams in their ear. That your lane? She hesitated. I'm not fearless, she said. Good, he replied. I don't trust fearless people. I trust the ones who are scared and still do math. He let that hang in the air for a second, then continued. Mission plan is as follows, he said. Mixed patrol moves up the valley. You go offset, lower on the right ridge at first, then higher as needed when we approach the crash site. You watch, you track, you stay ahead of our movement. If that opposition moves in, you pluck out their eyes and hands before they can get a full grip. Clear. You want me solo? She asked. Not a fan of that word, but yes, he said. You'll be too far from the main body, most of the time, for anyone to hold your hand. We're a little short now, in case you hadn't noticed. Mara looked at the photo. The valley yawned back at her in monochrome, a white knife scar between dark stone. If those tracks are what you think, she said, they might not be late to the party. We might be. His eyes narrowed. All the more reason to get a set of steady hands up high. Her heart thudded in her chest. She wanted to say no, to cling to the safe, boring world of wind logs and optics maintenance, to stay where failure only meant bad numbers on a screen, not bodies in the snow. But she saw again, in her mind, the crude target on the range caned down by her rounds. The notes in her notebook. The way the wind here spoke to her in angles and arrows. There was a part of her that had never left that prone position, that knew, without pride, that she could make the shots others weren't even sure were possible. She also saw Mike's face, her brother's, the frozen second when everything inside her had locked. I don't know if I can move when it's real, she said quietly. Reef shrugged once. No one knows anything for sure until rounds go downrange, he said. I'm not asking for a promise. I'm making a wager. On you. He slid a small card across the desk toward her. It bore a list of frequencies, call signs, and a hand-drawn diagram of the valley from another angle. Gear up, he said. You step off with us at first light. That night, Mara lay on her bunk staring at the metal slats above her. The barracks hummed with heaters and soft snores. Someone's music leaked faintly through earbuds, a tinny rhythm barely audible. She turned on her side and reached under her pillow. Her fingers found the edge of a small photograph, the corners worn round from years of handling. Her brother grinned up from the picture. Younger, uniform too big for him, beret crooked. Sunlight glared off the range behind him, the frame of a target lane just visible. He'd mailed the photo home 2 weeks before he died. Mara traced the line of his jaw with her thumb, then slid the picture into a small plastic sleeve and tucked it into the inner pocket of her undershirt, close to her heart, where she had kept it since the funeral. Hey, Bert's voice drifted from the next bunk. You sleeping, Vance? Trying, she said. Word is Reef is dragging you up on the ridge tomorrow, he said, tone pitched low, cautious, as if he knew he was stepping near a sore spot, but couldn't stop himself. That's the job, she answered. There was a pause. Springs creaked. I heard about basic, he said softly. Folks like to talk. They remember things out here where there's not much else to pass the hours. Just so, some of us figure that was range officer fault, not yours. It makes more sense that way. She stared at the dark. You weren't there, she murmured. Nope, but I've seen enough bad calls, he said. Anyway, just wanted to say, we're heading into a bowl. I'll take any extra eyes I can get, even if they live in the weather shack most days. Her throat tightened. A strange warmth nudged at the cold in her chest. Get some sleep, she managed. Working on it, he muttered. In the morning, the sky was hard and clear. The patrol formed up near the gate as first light pushed over the ridges. Snow squeaked on her boots. Breath plumed in the air. Metal clanked softly as weapons were checked one last time. Mara stood apart for a moment, adjusting the straps on her pack. Reef staff had issued her a light climbing kit, rope, a handful of anchors, a small harness that fit over her winter gear. She'd cinched it all down with tight, practice motions. Her rifle hung across her chest. Extra magazines lined her chest rig. Her notebook rode in a small pouch where she could reach it without looking. Reef moved down the line, checking his men with quick, practice glances. When he reached her, he stopped. You know your phase line? He asked. Yes, sir, she said. Break away at the frozen stream bed. Ascend East Gully, Set first overwatch on the lower outcrop. Call eyes on the valley. If clean, shadow from above. He nodded. If dirty, find whoever is watching us and cut their string, she said. His mouth ticked in something that might have been the start of a smile. Stay on net. We'll be under your arc until we hit that wreck. Once we're there, things may get loud. She nodded. Bert passed by, gave her a short, sharp nod, face already set in his patrol mask. Others glanced her way too, some curious, some indifferent. No one said much. They were conserving warmth, conserving words. The gate creaked open. The patrol stepped out into the valley, boots breaking the crust of old snow. Mara moved with them for the first kilometer, sticking to the right flank, eyes already measuring angles. The freezing air burned in her lungs, but her stride found a rhythm. At the frozen riverbed, she stopped, looked up at the right-hand ridge. Snowfields spilled down in smooth swaths, broken by ribs of rock. Up higher, jagged shapes clawed at the sky. It wasn't a pretty path. She took one last look at the patrol moving on, then turned her back and started to climb. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed high enough to wash the valley in harsh, white light. Mara lay on a narrow ledge of rock, chest pressed flat to the stone, rifle settled on its tripod. Snow crusted her sleeves and hood. Her breath puffed out in short, steady clouds. She had reached the first planned perch without incident, then edged higher when the patrol moved closer to the crash site. Her legs still burned from the ascent, but she ignored the fatigue, focusing instead on the scope's field of view. Through glass, the world narrowed to clean frames. The patrol threading into the bowl, small figures against a wide, blank canvas. The black smear of the wreck in the center, the ridges beyond. She had drawn a range card on a small index card, numbers scribbled next to rough shapes of rock and snow. Each spot where a threat could hide had a distance next to it now. 300 meters. 600. More. Overwatch in position. She murmured into her mic, eyes on the valley. No movement on the slopes. Crash site looks quiet. Too quiet. Copy. Overwatch. Reef's voice came back, slightly distorted but clear enough. Stay sharp. She adjusted the focus, scanning slowly. The patrol spread out near the wreck, forming a rough arc while a small team moved in to check the debris. Burke, on me, she heard over the net. Watch that north side. I don't like that shadow strip. She glanced at the north ridge. A dark smudge of rock and snow. Nothing moved. Nothing flashed. Her gaze drifted upward to the higher line of stone beyond the first ridges. Those heights were too far for most small arms to matter. But not for glass, not for eyes. She frowned. Something glittered. A trick of ice, she told herself. The sun hit certain angles and turned simple things into sparkles. Still, her gut tightened. She swung the scope slightly, tracking along the ridge. There, a faint flash. Then nothing. Then another, a few meters away. Too steady. Too regular. Her mind paged through hours on the small range behind the outpost. Through every time she'd looked through her optic and caught the faint wink of sunlight off someone else's scope. Her thumb hit the radio switch. Reef, overwatch, she said. I've got glint on the higher ridge to your north. At least 2 points. Possible glass. Possible optics. That's static hammered into her ear. The clear audio cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a jagged scream of noise. A low hum underpinned it, like a generator idling in the background. She winced and yanked the earbud half out. Her other hand clenched on the grip of her rifle. Reef, overwatch, say again. You're coming in rough, she said. No answer. Only that grind. Mara's stomach sank. That hum wasn't the regular background of distant engines. It had a pattern, a pulse. Jammer. Her fingers moved without conscious thought, turning the knob to another channel, then another. Each one was the same. A wall of noise swallowing any voice that might have tried to make it through. She swallowed and stared back into the scope. Okay, she whispered to herself. Okay, that's how you want to play it. Down in the valley, the patrol continued to move, unaware. The small team reached the wreck, boots sinking into drifted snow around twisted metal. One of them pried at a panel with a tool. Another covered, rifle up. Mara swung back to the ridges, tracing the glints. Her scope caught a hint of dark shape behind a rock. A barrel, maybe, or a shield. She looked lower. The smooth slope was unmarked. No fresh slides, no obvious fighting position. Whoever was up there had come in ahead of them, using the old track she'd seen on the satellite photo, and had dug in. Her heart rate picked up. She forced herself to take a slow breath, then another. A low whump sounded in the distance. For a second, she thought it was something in her memory. Then she saw the impact, far side of the valley, a column of snow leaping high into the air. Mortar! Move! She hissed under her breath. Move! Another whump. Closer this time. She watched the patrol below react, heads snapping up, bodies twisting toward the sound. They shouted, the words lost at this distance. A third impact threw a soldier off his feet. The mountains seemed awake. Heavy guns opened on the ridges, their flashes interrupting the smooth white with savage bursts of orange. Tracers streaked down into the valley, carving lines through the air. From her vantage, Mara saw the pattern instantly. 2 major firing points on either side, set high to cover most of the bowl. Mortars walking in from the far end. Kill box. They had walked straight into a trap. She flicked her thumb to push to talk again, knowing it was futile. Reef, overwatch. You are taking fire from 2 machine guns at your 10 and 2 o'clock, high on the slopes, range 600 plus. Mortars from the far end, likely pre-registered on her route. You are in the... Static screamed back. She grit her teeth, cut transmission, and pressed her cheek back to the stock. Fine, she muttered. We skipped the talking part. She centered the scope on the left-hand flash. Heat shimmer off the snow made the image wobble. The gun sat behind a low wall of packed snow and rock, only the barrel and part of the shield visible. 2 shapes ducked and rose behind it, moving with practiced ease. Her first shot went for the gunner's shoulder, the slice of dark cloth where armor met neck. The range was long, the angle sharp. The wind over the ridge pushed her round a fraction harder than she'd planned. The crack of her rifle came back to her like a slap. In the scope, she saw the crew flinch. The round smacked into the dirt just next to the gunner's ear, spraying him with snow. He jerked, cursed, and ducked. The barrel jerked sideways. The next burst from that gun went high, tracing lines in the air over the patrol instead of through them. Not good enough, she hissed. Before she could adjust, a small dark shape popped up on the right side of her view. An enemy launched a palm-sized drone from behind a rock, tossing it into the air. The tiny craft word, props spinning furiously as it caught itself, and then drifted up, right then left, scanning. It turned toward her ridge, camera lens glinting once as it searched for the source of that unexpected shot. Oh, no, you don't. She swung the scope, tracking the little intruder. It was harder to hit than any man, tiny, erratic. Yet once it caught the light again, she saw its path, saw the brief moment when it held nearly still. She fired. The drone hiccuped midair, one rotor disintegrating. It spun, tried to correct, then dropped in a clattering tumble onto the rocks below. Her satisfaction lasted less than a second. The moment that drone had angled toward her ridge, someone on the far side had understood its last transmission, its last angle. Machine gun fire raked the rocks around her with a roaring, hammering blast. Stone shards exploded past her face. Something hot and sharp scratched her cheek, left warmth on her skin that cut through the cold. She rolled away from the ledge by pure instinct, hugging the rock as rounds tore into the spot she'd been in a heartbeat before. Chips of stone rained down on her back. Her breath caught. For a second, she felt the same inner lock she had in that training lane. Muscles wanting to clamp down, mind wanting to curl around the echo of old screams. Then another mortar blast rolled through the valley below, a wave of sound and concussive force. She heard voices over the jammer's howl, raw, panicked. The shout of a man hit, the answering cry of someone running toward him. Her brother's name tried to rise in her throat. She shoved it down with numbers. Range to the left gun. Wind speed. Drop. Correction for mirage. Correction for angle. She whispered each factor under her breath, drowning out the rest. Down below, a figure with a large antenna on his back went down with a drawn-out shout. The radio man. Another soldier dove for him, only to jerk as rounds found their mark. They're going for the radios, she thought. They want us blind. Reef's voice came over the net, faint under the jam, cursing, trying to coordinate, trying to call for air. The words broke apart into slices of sound and static. The valley floor, a shallow bowl with gentle slopes, offered almost nothing for the patrol to hide behind. A few half-buried rocks, a twisted section of a wreck. The angles from above covered almost all of it. Every time someone moved, snow around them leapt in little deaths. From her scraped, compromised perch, Mara couldn't see the second major gun well enough to risk a shot. And the mortar arcs were just beyond her sight, tucked behind a fold in the far landscape. They'd set this up with care. They had studied the valley's geometry, the way she had, but with the aim of murder instead of rescue. Time bled away. Her first hide was shot to pieces. If she stayed, it was only a matter of minutes before a stray. Round found the soft biology under the armor. If she moved, she had to do it under observation, up a slope now known to the enemy. She wiped the blood from her cheek with the back of her glove, smearing it into the fabric. Think, she told herself. She peered over the broken rock, just enough to catch a new angle. Mortars were bracketing the patrol now, rounds falling in a rough circle that tightened by the minute. The wounded radio man lay crumpled near the wreck, one leg a mess of reddened cloth. Two of the locals crouched over him, trying to drag him, only to get pinned by fire. Extraction window is gone, she muttered. Choppers wouldn't dare drop into that bowl now, not with unknown heavy weapons and a jammer still pounding the airwaves. She needed ridges. She needed height. She needed an angle behind the guns and the mast. From this position, she had none. Mara's gaze tracked upward and right, searching for any route. That was when she saw the narrow ice gully. It carved up the side of the higher ridge like a scar, steep and shadowed, wedged between two jags of rock. It ended in a broken lip high above the valley, a perch that might look down over the whole killing field from behind. No marked path, no safety, just ice and desperation. Her stomach clenched. She touched her hand mic. The static clawed at her ears, but Reef's voice came through in ragged bursts. Anyone. Eyes were boxed options. Reef, overwatch, she barked. I have a possible route to higher ground on the east side. Gully leads to a crest that may give me a shot on their guns and jammer. There was a crackle, then his voice, rough and strained. Route safe? Absolutely not, she said. I'll be alone, exposed, and I don't know if the top has enough cover. But from here, I'm useless in 10 minutes when they range you. Up there, I might do some good. There was a pause. She pictured him in the valley, crouched behind a rock, rounds kicking up snow around him, looking up toward a patch of sky that meant nothing to anyone else. This is Reef, he came back. Take it. That is an order. You fall, I owe you a drink in the next life. You make it, you save us a trip to the morgue. Move. Her hand tightened on the mic. Copy, she said. Overwatch moving. She clipped the radio down, slung her rifle behind her, and reached for the coil of rope on her pack. She dumped everything that wasn't vital. Extra comfort items. Spare socks. The heavy, seldom used tools that had seemed important yesterday. It was time now. Time she didn't have. Her fingers moved fast, setting a chest harness, tying a knot, looping rope through. She looked once more at the valley. Burke was a dark shape near the radio man, muzzle flashing quick bursts as he traded fire with shapes on the ridge. One of the locals dragged a wounded man through the snow, leaving a smear behind him. We're paying for every second I waste, she thought. She turned and lunged for the gully. Snow gave way under her boots, sending sloughs of powder down. She drove her crampons into the harder crust under the loose layer, found purchase, then hauled herself up, hand over hand, boots scraping. The gully narrowed above, its sides rising in slick walls of blue ice. Wind funneled through it, slapping her hood, cutting through layers. She set her first anchor, a small metal piece jammed into a crack, with fingers that had started to go numb. Carabiner clacked as she clipped the rope through. Her breath came faster, fogging the air in front of her face. Her muscles burned. She ignored them, eyes set on the dark notch of sky far above. Halfway up, the gully constricted, so it was almost a chute. She placed her boots in tiny notches of ice, pushed up, reaching for the next hold. Her gloved hand slapped onto what she thought was solid. The ice slab snapped. Time went thin. She dropped a meter, two, rope whipping against her harness. Her shoulder smashed into the wall. Her rifle clanged off the rock. Something cracked with a sound that made her blood run colder. The rope caught. Her harness bit into her waist with a savage jolt. She swung, slammed into the ice again, and hung there, dangling, heart hammering, breath knocked almost out of her. Her rifle hung across her chest at an odd angle. She eased one hand down and swore under her breath. The scope had taken the impact. A hairline fracture zigzagged across the front glass. Not enough to shatter it, but enough to warp the view. The optic had also shifted in its mount. Not much, just enough that zero was now a question mark. She dangled there, boots scraping at air for purchase, the rope creaking under her weight. Another mortar blast thundered up from the valley. Her mind tried to freeze, to curl inward around the familiar, poisonous thought. You screwed it up. You're broken. They were right. She shut her eyes. Ranges, she whispered. Drop at 700. Crosswind at 10. Angle of fire adjustment at 30 degrees. You know this. You live in this. Move. She took 3 short breaths, then forced her boots back toward the wall. Crampon scraped, skidded, then found purchase. She pushed up, hand over hand, fingers screaming. The gully seemed to go on forever. The wind whistled through it, bringing with it the muffled thunder of battle. Each time a round landed below, the ice vibrated faintly, tiny flakes raining down into her eyes. She climbed anyway. At last, after an eternity measured in burning muscles and frantic heartbeats, her hand found the lip. She hooked an elbow over the edge, then a knee, dragging herself onto the crest. Wind hit her full in the face, icy and strong. The ridge up here was narrow, jagged, its upper surface a messy mix of snow drifts and sharp rock. From this vantage, the valley lay far below, a white bowl splashed with smoke and shadows. Mara crawled forward on her stomach, pressing close to the snow to keep her silhouette low. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. She slid the rifle off her back and set it up in front of her, elbows digging into the crust. For a second, she hesitated, hand hovering over the cracked scope. Then she swallowed, flipped the caps, peered through. The world on the other side of the glass was warped. The hairline crack split the picture in two, each side bending the image slightly. Straight lines looked kinked. The far ridges curved where they should have been flat. This day just keeps getting better, she muttered. She lifted her head and dug into her pack, fingers closing around a smaller optic wrapped in cloth, a compact, lighter scope she used on the range sometimes, with less magnification but clear glass. She set it next to the cracked main, jury-rigged a mount onto a spare bit of rail, and tightened it down. 2 sets of eyes now, one blurred but stronger, one clear but narrow. She rolled her shoulders, then looked down into the valley again. From up here, she saw everything she had only guessed at before. The jammer truck sat near a small cluster of mountain huts on a ledge beyond the western ridge, partly hidden from the valley floor. A thin mast rose from its roof, small dish and antenna arrays bristling from the top. Cables ran from the truck to a generator that churned out a faint plume of smoke. Around the huts moved people, not fighters mostly, villagers, wrapped in thick coats and scarves, heads down as they hauled crates, fuel cans, and other supplies under the watch of armed men. A woman stumbled under the weight of a crate. One of the gunmen snapped something at her and shoved her forward. Mara's jaw clenched. They'd tucked their jammer and support under the cover of civilians. Locals were carrying fuel to the machine that made her friends' radios useless. Above that position, on a higher rock lip, lay a sniper and spotter pair. Their rifles swept over the valley, their binoculars cut through the smoke. Beside them, a crew worked frantically around a larger weapon, an anti-air gun on a low mount, barrel angled toward the mouth of the valley where any chopper would have to appear. On the far ridges, the machine guns still growled, though the mortars had paused, probably adjusting or cooling. Down in the bowl, the patrol had shrunk, bodies tucked into whatever hollows they could find. The radio man still lay near the wreck, his leg at a wrong angle. Burke knelt near him, firing short bursts to keep heads down as he tried to drag the man back. Reef crouched behind a chunk of metal, scanning for any chance to move. Mara's chest ached. She could not simply shoot the truck. A stray round through the side panel, a spark near a fuel can, and the generator or the mast might turn into shrapnel that tore through anyone nearby. She pictured the villagers, the woman who had stumbled. She switched to the small, clear optic. It showed a tighter slice of the scene, but without the frustrating warp. She could confirm targets with it, then use the crack scope for range estimation and rough hold. It was a terrible setup. It would have to do. She flipped the safety off and let the familiar weight of the rifle settle into her bones. You wanted math under stress, she told Reef under her breath, even though he couldn't hear her. Let's see if that bet pays out. She centered the crosshairs on the Overwatch sniper above the jammer. Her mind built a ladder in front of her, invisible rungs of flesh and steel she would need to break. Sniper, spotter, anti-air crew, jammer operators, radio men, mortar control, squad leaders. Only then the rest. Her heart rate slowed as she counted. 1, 2. She pressed the trigger. The shot cracked, snapped through the air, and vanished toward the man on the rock. In her scope, there was a tiny jolt as the bullet found him. He jerked backward, head snapping, body rolling out of sight. She ran the bolt, moved an inch. The spotter froze for half a heartbeat in shock, then reached for his glass. Her second shot hit him high in the chest, throwing him sideways. She exhaled slowly, the chill air burning her lungs. Down in the valley, incoming fire from that direction faltered. Reef, ever quick, sensed the shift and barked new orders, his voice now clearer in her ear for reasons she didn't have time to unpack. The jamming wasn't gone, but some aspect of command and control had just gone blind. The anti-air crew reacted to their fallen neighbors. One man stood, shouting down toward the huts. Another ducked behind the shield, as if expecting fire. Mara shifted her point of aim to the loader, the only part of him visible, a bare arm, gloveless for dexterity, reaching for a shell. Instead of center mass shot, she aimed low, at the elbow. She fired. The man screamed, dropping the round and clutching his arm. The pain dragged him fully into view as he rose. The gunner moved to help. Her next bullet took the gunner in the upper chest, knocking him back over the weapon's controls. The heavy barrel swung off target, lurching upward toward empty sky. Static still chewed her ear, but beneath it she caught Reef again. Whoever you are up there, keep doing that. She didn't have time to answer. Below the jammer, the enemy commander whipped around, shouting orders. A small team broke off in the huts, moving upslope, rifles slung, climbing gear swinging at their waists. They headed straight toward Mara's ridge. At the same time, another drone buzzed into view. Smaller than the first, more agile, it hugged the rock faces, sensors searching for heat and muzzle flash. She felt her pulse jump. If that drone found her, those climbers would have a precise path to follow. Her crest would turn from sanctuary into her own kind of bowl. She switched optics, tracked the drone with quick, tiny movements. Its shape flickered between rocks. It rose into the clear air for a half second as it crossed a gap. She took the shot in that gap, the crack of her rifle almost masked by the drone's whine in her ears. The round clipped one rotor just enough. The craft spun out, smashing against the cliff, pieces scattering. "Stay blind," she whispered. The climbers kept coming anyway. She put a round into the lead climber's thigh, targeting the bigger silhouette as he crested a hump of snow. He dropped with a cry, grabbing at his leg, sliding back down, knocking another off balance. That slowed them, but did not stop the ascent entirely. Two of them hugged the rock and adjusted their path, making themselves smaller targets. They'd be here in minutes. She checked her magazines. Her heart sank. She'd burned through more than she'd hoped early on. Between the drone shots, the suppressive rounds at the first gun, and now the Overwatch and anti-air, her remaining count was slim. She did the math fast. Sniper and spotter gone. Anti-air disrupted. A few climbers wounded. Drones down. Left on the list, the jammer operators, any radio men, mortar control, at least one machine gun crew, and that commander shouting his lungs out. plus whoever stumbled into view to threaten her directly. She couldn't miss. Not once. Down in the bowl, the patrol used the small gap she'd carved. They shifted laterally, tried to move out of the tightest bracket of mortar fire. A team shouldered the radio man and staggered toward a shallow depression that might cut some of the shrapnel. On a mid-slope perch beyond her old vantage point, she saw someone with a clipboard and a small radio set. Not quite obvious, but clear to her trained eye. The mortar led, calling adjustments. He had a small fireboard set on a rock and was in the middle of shouting into his mic when he paused, listening, then began moving his hands over the board. Mara swung to him, checked her range estimate against her card. From up here, with the cracked glass and weird angles, the numbers fell off. The hairline fracture twisted her sense of straight lines. She couldn't trust the scope's grid the way she had before. She switched to the smaller optic, found him again, then back to the main, twisting the tube slightly, tried to align the crack along a line that mattered less. The crosshairs looked wrong. Crooked. She had never practiced this shot. No training manual had a chapter on how to compensate when your eye is looking through damaged glass at a man trying to kill your friends. But her hands remembered something else. Long winters in the woods back home, tracking deer through brush, taking shots through branches that bent the eye, reading the wind through the pattern of swaying limbs, making small, intuitive adjustments that had nothing to do with formal tables. She let that part of her take over. She aimed not where the scope said the center was, but a hair off, a tiny correction that matched the warp she saw. She breathed out, squeezed. The recoil kicked snow into her face. Through the blur and crack, she watched the mortar lead stiffen and drop, the small board spinning from his hands. His radio tumbled, bouncing off the rock and into the snow. A moment later, mortar rounds across the valley went wild. Two short, one long, none where they should be. Then nothing. Silence in that register. Bless silence. Reef's voice surged in her ear, clearer now that some of the worst interference had stumbled. We got a crack in their net. Air, this is Hammer Actual, requesting gunship on Vector. A second, different voice joined, faint but eager. Copy, Hammer. One bird inbound, stay out of our way. They'd gotten through. Mara shifted targets again, this time to a man near the jammer truck with a distinctive antenna assembly on his back, barking into a handset. Radio man. She put a round into his chest and watched him fall against the side of the truck. The enemy commander, seeing that, grabbed the handset off his body and started shouting into it himself, other hand waving his fighters forward, pointing at a ridge. The remaining climbers redoubled their efforts, scrambling through snow, taking less care with cover now that their commander's focus was fixed on that sliver of rock where death had started to rain from the sky. She picked the next one halfway up and put a bullet into his shoulder. He spun, clinging to the cliff, dangled for a moment, then lost his grip. He slid, bounced, and smashed into a ledge below, where he lay still. Her next magazine was her second to last. Shots from below grew sporadic as the patrol conserved ammo. She could see them moving more boldly now that mortar arcs had stopped, though the machine guns still snarled. The air trembled with a new sound, faint at first, then building, rotors beating against the thin atmosphere. Not the high whine of the small drones, but the deeper thrum of a bird with teeth. Gunship. The anti-air weapon crew tried to rally. A replacement man jumping into the gunner's slot and hauling the barrel down toward the valley mouth. But with the loader wounded and the controls out of tune, the weapon slewed off target. Mara fed quick updates into the mic, voice clipped. Gunship on approach, be advised, remaining machine gun positions on north and south ridges. Approximate bearings. Marked smokestacks near crash site. Rock shelf shaped like a hook just above. Jammer truck on western shelf near huts. Mass still active. Copy, overwatch. The gunship pilot drawled. We see your mess down there. Gonna clean up some of that trash for you. The first run shredded the remaining machine gun on the left ridge. A line of tracer fire swept across the position, turning sandbags into torn cloth and splinters, turning men into crimson smears on the snow. Mara ducked instinctively at the roar of rounds passing under her perch. The jammer still hummed. Its mast still reached into the sky, channeling that dirty fuzz across the net. Voices were clearer now, but not perfect. Someone on the ground was trying to keep it alive. The climbers were close enough now that she could see their faces, pale and strained, eyes dark with focus and hate. Two more, maybe three behind a rock she couldn't see. She checked her last magazine. 5 rounds, one for each climber she could manage, and none left for herself if they got close enough to see her eyes before they slipped a blade between her ribs. She made a choice. She let the climbers come. For now, she shifted her aim back to the jammer. Villagers moved around it still, faces pinched, hands raw from carrying crates. One man's scarf flapped in the wind as he staggered under a fuel can. An armed guard jerked him by the collar. She could not shoot them. She could shoot what they served. She aimed low, at the base of the mast where it met the truck's roof, where the cables routed through. She fired. The round snapped through metal and wire. Sparks spat out. The mast swayed, then tilted, leaning drunkenly. The hum in her ear turned ragged. She sent her second-to-last shot into the generator housing, aiming where she guessed the fuel lines and engine would be. Metal buckled. Smoke poured out, darker now, smelling, even up here, burning oil. The jammer's noise stuttered, surged, then hiccuped and died. For the first time since the valley had erupted, the radio net snapped into full clarity, voices sharp and close. "We have full comms back," someone yelled, joy and shock crossing the net. "Gunship, hammer actual, jammer neutralized, you are clear to saturate those slopes," Reef called, the strain in his voice under tight control now. "We are bounding toward the mouth of the valley with wounded and package. Cover our advance." "Copy, Hammer," the pilot said. "We've got you backs." A roar louder than anything before shook the mountain as the gunship rolled in again, cannons barking, rockets streaking toward the remaining positions. Snow erupted in fountains. Rock splintered. Fighters who had been so confident minutes ago scrambled for cover that no longer existed. The climbers on Mara's flank, now fully committed to their ascent, shouted in alarm as the slopes behind them exploded. One lost his footing, lurching sideways. Another dropped flat and clung to the rock. She focused on the one closest to her, the man who had almost reached the top. His face was a rictus of desperation. A knife handle stuck from his vest. A pistol rode on his hip. Her shot took him in the chest, pinning him to the wall for an instant before gravity peeled him away. Another tried to swing around a boulder, looking for a way to flank under her. She put a round into his thigh, and he dropped with a howl. Her last round sat in the chamber. She thought of keeping it. For herself. For some last-ditch act. Then she thought of the jammer, still sputtering, some backup system perhaps on the verge of kickback. She sent the final bullet into the antenna array on top of the mast. The remaining dish shattered, pieces spinning off into the snow like broken wings. The silence that followed on the net was different. Cleaner. The hum was gone for good now. She sagged for a second, arms shaking. Then rounds chewed into the snow where her head had been a heartbeat before. The remaining climbers, wounded or not, had found their range. Shots cracked, splintering the rock around her. She pressed herself flat, tried to melt into the glacier, feeling suddenly small and very mortal. Her ammo pouches were empty. She began to crawl, sliding backward along the crest. Keeping the rifle hugged to her chest, she moved as fire raked the higher edge. Chips of rock and ice pelted her face. Below, the patrol moved. Mara couldn't see each step now, but the radio fed her the picture. "Hammer, this is Burke. We're moving the wounded toward Rally Point Bravo. Contact light on our right. Heavier on left. Bird is chewing them up," came Burke's voice, breathless but intact. "Keep moving," Reef answered. "Package secure?" A new voice chimed in. "Package is secure, sir. Sensor case intact. Bringing it out with second team. Gunship, watch our flanks, north and south. We're bounding in pairs." Mara listened, breathing hard, as they pulled away from the kill zone she'd first watched them walk into. Each voice on the net was a proof of life. Each call sign a name she could match to a face. She dragged herself another meter downslope, found a shallow depression behind a jut of rock, and tucked into it as best she could. Bullets still hit the crest above now and then, but more erratically. The climbers knew she existed, but with the sky falling around them in fire and shrapnel, they had other concerns too. Her fingers had gone numb. Her cheek throbbed where the rock chips had cut it earlier. She could feel sticky warmth crusting the skin. She licked her lips, tasted salt and iron. The gunship roared one last time, strafing near the jammer and the farguns, then pulled up. Over the net, the pilot's voice came, lighter now. "Hammer, we've done most of what we can without knocking half the mountain down on you," he said. "We see your people near the valley mouth. Dust-off birds are inbound on your beacon. You have maybe 10 minutes before this weather window closes." "Understood," Reef said. "Overwatch status?" Mara blinked. "I'm here," she managed. Her voice sounded small and hoarse, even to her own ears. "No rounds left. Climbers are wounded or pinned near my position. Jammer gone. Mortars silent. Anti-air out. I'm going to be late to any party you're throwing." There was a pause. Then Reef's voice, firm. "You stay alive," he said. "That's an order. We'll talk when the snow stops falling." She huffed out something like a laugh, half cough. "Copy, sir." The wind rose, whipping snow across the ridge in swirling veils. The valley below started to blur at the edges, the stark shapes of men and machines fading into impression. She lay there, breathing slowly, listening to the net as the patrol staggered toward extraction, as medical teams hurried to meet them near the mouth of the valley. As the first chopper beat the air with its own small storm and then lifted away with a howling wounded man aboard, she closed her eyes only when she heard Burke's tired voice say, "All accounted for who can be. We're out." Hours later, warmth felt wrong. The large forward facility where they'd flown the wounded in was a maze of corridors and humming lights. The air smelled of antiseptic, hot wiring, and too many bodies in one place. Mara sat on a metal chair outside a briefing room, hands wrapped around a foam cup of coffee gone lukewarm. A bandage ran along her cheekbone, white against the bruises blooming under her eye. Her rifle leaned against the wall next to her, scope still cracked. No one had touched it. The hallway beyond was quiet in that busy way of headquarters. Distant phones, muted voices behind doors, the occasional cart squeaking past with files or medical supplies. The patrol had come in on stretchers, and under their own power, wrapped in blankets, faces gray with exhaustion and shock. Some had nodded to her when they recognized her. Others hadn't looked up at all. She had seen Burke once, sitting on a bench with a bandage around his upper arm, staring at his boots. He'd caught her eye, gave a small, wordless nod, and then looked away, jaw working. The door beside her creaked open. "Vance," Reef said, nodding toward the room. "You're up." She stood, joints stiff, and followed him inside. The briefing room was small, its walls crowded with maps and screens. An intelligence officer sat at the far end of the table, glasses low on his nose, a folder in front of him. His expression was tired but sharp. He gestured for her to sit. "Specialist Vance," he said. "Commander Reef, thank you for joining us." She sat, the chair cold even through her uniform. The officer opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. It showed the crashed drone before it crashed, sleek and clean, its sensor bay highlighted in red. "This bird carried a set of eyes we used to watch your playground," he said, tapping the image. "Not just pictures, patterns, routes, all the little gaps and habits that make up your day out there. When it went down, we hoped the weather and terrain would keep anyone else from getting to it before us." He switched photos. The next shot was of maps and notebooks taken from dead fighters at the valley. On one, the patrol's planned route into the valley was traced in neat pen. Timings, likely positions. "We were wrong," he continued. "The opposition had someone watching our nets, or someone talking out turn back here. They knew the route. They knew the timing. They moved in ahead of you, set up the jamming truck among locals to discourage airstrikes, position mortars and guns on pre-registered points. They wanted that sensor package intact. Failing that, they wanted your unit destroyed in a way that could play well on their feeds." He looked up at her. "They were not amateurs. You know that already." She nodded. "Yes, sir." He turned a page in his notes. "Commander Reef tells me he made an unorthodox decision," the officer said. sending what your record calls a support reclass up a mountain alone to serve as overwatch on a mission of that importance. You took that risk for reasons I'd like to understand now. Reef spoke up before she could. I watched her shoot, he said, leaning back slightly. Out there behind the outpost, and today up in the ridge. Her range book reads like a fire manual for those mountains. She tracks gusts most people don't even feel. Up there, I didn't need another rifle on the line. I needed someone who could outthink a mortar team. She did. The officer raised an eyebrow. At some risk to herself. And others. That was the job, Reef said. The officer looked at Mara again. Walk me through your decisions, he said. From first contact to final shot. Especially the climb. And the choice to fire near civilians at the jammer site. She did. She told them about the glints, the cut-off transmission, the sudden pattern of mortar fire. She spoke of the initial shots, the drone, the way the valley shape made their patrol a gift. When she recounted the climb, her tone grew involuntarily clipped. She glossed over the moment of panic when the ice slab broke, but she didn't omit the cracked scope, the improvised second optic. So you chose to press on despite damaged gear, the officer said. Alone, without certainty of cover on the crest. If I went back to the first perch, I would have been a target without a shot, she said. Up there, I had at least a chance to mess up their plan. And the villagers? He asked, voice even. You saw them near the jammer. Yet you fired anyway. I aimed for equipment only, she said. Base of the mast, generator housing. I kept my crosshairs away from anyone unarmed. I took more time because of that, which was not ideal given the climbers heading my way. But burning through that truck without hitting them was the only line I could live with. He studied her. Did you consider calling fire on that position for the gunship instead? He asked. Let them handle the risk calculation. At the moment, I had more accurate eyes on it than they did, she said. And with the jammer up, their ability to coordinate with ground was bad. If I waited until they had a clear picture, we might have lost more down in the bowl. She hesitated, then added, I also didn't trust their restraint as much as I trusted my own. One corner of his mouth twitched just slightly. The mortar led, he said. That shot. Our analysis shows you fired from a warped optic at mid-range without a fresh zero. That's not in any manual I've read. She glanced at her rifle, propped against the wall, then at her own hands. I've spent a lot of time in those hills, she said quietly, watching how wind bends things. At home, our woods weren't flat, either. Shots through brush, around branches. You make corrections based on what you feel, not what you're told. Today, everything was wrong in that scope, so I trusted the part of my head that knows how wrong glass lies. Reef gave a faint snort. That's the polite version, he said. The officer's gaze drifted to the bandage on her cheek. One more thing, he said. Your file says you failed a key step at basic. That under stress and with simulated casualties, you stopped moving. Today, under far worse stress and with actual wounded screaming over the net, you not only moved, you did very hard tasks at the exact moment your heart should have seized. What changed? Her fingers clenched around the foam cup until it crumpled a little. My brother died in a training mishap, she said, voice low, eyes on the table. On a range not unlike that lane. When that casualty screamed during my assessment, it sounded like him. It broke something. I froze. I walked off the range knowing, absolutely, that if that had been real, I'd have failed him twice. Once by not being there. Once by being there and not moving. She took a breath, aware of both men watching her in silence. In the valley today, she went on, when that radio man went down and started screaming over the net, it sounded the same. For a second, back on the first perch, my hand stopped. It was the same fault line opening. The same drop under my feet. She swallowed. But then another mortar round hit, she said. And I thought, those are my people down there now. All of them. Not ghosts. If I freeze again, they don't go home. So I force my mind to run numbers. I'll let the part of me that knows this terrain take over. I didn't stop being scared. I just aimed through it. Her cheeks warmed under the bruises. She felt oddly exposed. Saying it out loud made the whole mess inside her chest more real. The officer sat back, studying her as if she were some complex diagram on the wall. Your choices were outside strict guidelines, he said at last. Climbing unscouted ground alone. Firing with damaged optics. acting near non-combatants. Under other circumstances, I'd be writing a very different report. He shut the folder with a soft snap. In these circumstances, he continued, the fact remains that without your actions, we would have lost a patrol, a sensor package, and any hope of knowing how deeply the opposition has penetrated our net. You compensated for a jammed command net, you neutralized key assets, and you did so while keeping the count of civilians in that valley at 0. He glanced at Reef. Commander, your wager appears to have paid off. Reef nodded once. I recommend she never goes back to the weather shack unless she wants to, he said. There's a course back home that teaches people how to do what she just did. I suggest we send her, even if she can probably teach half of it already. The officer smiled thinly. That's on my list, he said. Specialist Vance, how would you feel about formal training? Long gun. High country. No more pretending you're just support. Her first instinct was to say she didn't deserve it, that she had failed once and that stain would never quite wash out. Then she thought of the ridge, of the way the wind had wrapped around her there, how the patterns had snapped into place as soon as she stopped trying to be brave and started doing the job. She thought of Burke's nod, of the voices on the net alive. She also thought of her brother's photo, warm against her chest even now. I'd take it, she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. The officer nodded. Consider this your unofficial notice then, he said. There will be paperwork. Committees. We love those. But this much is simple. You're no longer the person that line in your file tries to pin down. You never were just that, frankly. He stood, gathering his notes. Commander Reef, he said, we'll need your full after-action report. Phrase it in your usual poetic way. I'm sure some future training slide will quote you. Reef gave a dry snort. My prose kills careers, he said, but I'll do my best. They left Mara alone for a moment in the quiet room. She sat there, listening to the hum of the building, to the faint sounds of boots in the hall, medical orders called down the corridor. She lifted a hand and touched the bandage on her cheek, then looked at her fingers, the faint smear of dried red there. She hadn't erased the person who froze on that training lane years ago. That fragment was still there, tucked in some corner of her mind, holding the echo of her brother's scream. But now it had to share space with another fragment. The woman who crawled up an ice gully with a cracked scope because people she knew by name were dying below. The two parts didn't cancel each other out. They coexisted, uneasy but linked. She stood, picked up her rifle, and turned to leave. Dusk came early in the mountains. By the time Mara stepped out of the facility, the sky was already deepening, the first stars pricking through the blue. The air was colder here than the valley had been. Evening drains heat fast in high country. She walked past the landing zone, where a chopper sat with its rotors tied down, dark shapes moving around it. In the distance, med tents glowed warm and yellow, shadows of nurses and doctors cutting across the light. No one stopped her as she headed toward the edge of the compound. Beyond the last coils of concertina wire, the land dropped away toward a vista that made her stomach flutter, a sweeping view of the ranges, ridges rising and falling like frozen waves. Somewhere out there lay the valley. From here, it was just another wrinkle. She climbed a short path to a rocky outcrop that jutted from the perimeter. It wasn't anywhere near as high as her perch had been, but it was enough to give her a clear view. Snow crunched under her boots. Her breath puffed in front of her face once more. At the edge, she stopped. She unslung her rifle and set it down on the rock beside her, then reached in her inner pocket and pulled out the photograph. Her brother's face grinned up at her in the fading light. She held it up so that the mountains squared his shoulders, then slowly lowered it, matching the small frame to the spread of land in front of her. I went up, she said softly. It sounded absurd, telling a scrap of paper about her day. But the words felt like they needed to be out in the air, not rattling around in her skull. When I walked into that bowl, I went up instead of folding. I heard the screaming, and I didn't shut down. Her eyes burned, the cold mixing with something warmer. I don't think that fixes anything, she said. You're still gone. That range still broke wrong. But I think you'd have liked the shot on that mortar guy. A rough laugh escaped her, half a sob. She crouched, brushed a bit of snow aside, and laid the picture gently on the rock. weighing it down with a small stone so it wouldn't blow away. "I'm going back up," she said. "They want to teach me how to do this for real, with a course and everything." Imagine that. She still wouldn't say the word that had once hung over her life like shame. Sniper. Not yet. But she knew now that when the next valley needed a quiet ghost on a ridge, she could be there. Not because she had no fear, but because she understood it, knew how to step around it long enough to do the work. Bootsteps crunched behind her. Reef stepped up beside her, hands tucked into his jacket. He didn't speak right away. They both looked out over the mountains, watching as the last streak of sunset bled away, leaving only snow and shadow. "You know," he said at last, voice low, "they'll want a quote from me for the official record." "About today?" she asked. "About you," he said. "How some bureaucrat in a warm office should think of you when they see your name on a training slide someday." She snorted. "Going to call me a hero?" she asked, unable to keep the dry edge out of her tone. "Heroes talk too much," he said. "I was thinking more along the lines of the truth." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, then read from it. Rough. "Subject did not conquer fear," he said. "She aimed through it, in conditions that broke most of our tech." Her eyes burned, the cold mixing with something warmer. "I don't think that fixes anything," she said. "You're still gone. That range still broke wrong. But I think you'd have liked the shot on that mortar guy." A rough laugh escaped her, half a sob. She crouched, brushed a bit of snow aside, and laid the picture gently on the rock, weighing it down with a small stone so it wouldn't blow away. "I'm going back up," she said. "They want to teach me how to do this for real, with a course and everything." Imagine that. She still wouldn't say the word that had once hung over her life like shame. Sniper. Not yet. But she knew now that when the next valley needed a quiet ghost on a ridge, she could be there. Not because she had no fear, but because she understood it, knew how to step around it long enough to do the work. Bootsteps crunched behind her. Reef stepped up beside her, hands tucked into his jacket. He didn't speak right away. They both looked out over the mountains, watching as the last streak of sunset bled away, leaving only snow and shadow. "You know," he said at last, voice low, "they'll want a quote from me for the official record." "About today?" she asked. "About you," he said. "How some bureaucrat in a warm office should think of you when they see your name on a training slide someday." She snorted. "Going to call me a hero?" she asked, unable to keep the dry edge out of her tone. "Heroes talk too much," he said. "I was thinking more along the lines of the truth." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, then read from it. Rough. "Subject did not conquer fear," he said. "She aimed through it. In conditions that broke most of our tech, she remained the only steady weapon on that mountain. If you're ever in a bowl with guns on the rim and everything starts to crack, you want Vance on the ridge. Trust me." He folded the paper again, tucked it away. "Something like that," he added. Her throat tightened. "You really wrote that?" she asked. "More or less," he said. "I may have used fewer commas. My grammar is suspect." She smiled faintly. The wind picked up for a moment, swirling snow around their boots. They stood there in silence as the mountains numbed from blue to black, as the stars hardened overhead, as the valley that had almost killed them sank into shadow. Finally, Mara picked up the photo again, brushed a new dusting of snow off the plastic, and slipped it back into her pocket. She slung her rifle. "All right," she said quietly, mostly to herself. One ridge down. Her gaze tracked along the horizon, where other white scars waited in the dark. "Plenty more to go."